$250,000 just sitting in your high yield savings account?
They've been hoarding this cash for so long that they're like, man, if I had just invested this money, I could have been sitting on double the amount.
But making that money work for you, like it is working for you. It's in your high yield savings account. It's going to protect you if a rainy day occurs, and it will.
We're probably not going out to eat. We're probably not saving as much money as we were. All the discretionary spending, like in my mind, that's getting rolled back.
I think you need to stop with your sinking funds. Just like, I think you're good.
You don't work so hard at your money just for the sake of working hard at your money. Like there's always got to be a purpose behind it.
Welcome to Just Another Money podcast with your hosts, Lauren and Nick. We're here to take real-world money situations and break them down into actionable steps you can actually use.
Whether you're budgeting, paying off debt, or saving for your future, we're all about making finances easy to understand and putting you in control of your money. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today we're talking about all things savings. From the different savings buckets you should have to optimizing for retirement, we're going to dive into some of the biggest questions around saving money. Now, we have a lot to cover, and so we really want to jump into it. But one note that we wanted to make is that in today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about investing, from different types of investments you can make to different types of accounts to invest in. And one note that we always like to make when we talk about investing is that you should really be doing your own research and not just taking what we say as like the thing you should be doing. A lot of times the way we answer these questions is what we would do in these situations, and that doesn't always apply to you. So definitely do your own research and know that you have to make these decisions for yourself. But, with all that said, Lauren, do you want to jump into the first question?
Yep. So this question says, what savings buckets should we have, and how do we figure out what percentage to put in each? My wife and I are newly married, and we are working on our shared finances. We both max out our retirement contributions, but we're curious how to approach our savings goals. We want to save for a few big life expenses coming up, like buying our first home, starting a family, new vehicles eventually, and even vacations. Should we have multiple savings buckets for different goals, or lump it all together in one big savings account?
Yeah, I really like questions like these because you can tell by the way that they worded it that they're kind of at that point in their finances where they've already, spent the time and energy building up that solid foundation, right? They're investing for retirement. They probably have their emergency fund set aside, their debt paid off. And now they're at the point where they can start focusing on how do I grow my finances? How do I really optimize by different accounts or different saving strategies? I think that's a really exciting point in your financial journey. But, to answer this person's question, personally, I always enjoy having different savings buckets for my different savings goals instead of just kind of lumping it all together into one big savings account. I think by having these different buckets, it makes it a lot easier to see the progress that I'm making, after several months or even several years, because, 6 months down the road or a few years down the road, I can kind of say, okay, I need to make this purchase and it would fall into this type of expense. Cool. I have a savings bucket over here that I can pull from. And you kind of get to a point where you build up all these different buckets and no matter what the expense is, whether it's kind of like for pleasure, right? Like going on vacation or something, or it's a specific type of an emergency. Maybe it's like a car repair that you have to do, right? You have a bucket of money to pull from. And I think this person kind of answered part of their question, right? They said they have these 4 big life goals coming up: buying a home, starting a family, new vehicles down the road, and even vacations. And I feel like those could be a really great place to start with your savings buckets. But what do you think, Lauren?
Yeah, I think, in regards to their questions about should we have one big savings account, I think you can put it all in your high yield savings account, which is essentially lumped together. But how my husband and I do it, we actually have like a shared spreadsheet. And anytime we put money into our high yield savings account, we will put it into the category that goes in, whether that's like down payment for a home or our travel fund or, a fund for a car or something like that. So I like breaking it up that way. If you just lump it all together and you don't keep track of like what it's actually for, it's a really good way to like use your emergency fund for like a vacation. You know what I mean? And then you're
exactly.
Yeah. And then you're really going to be missing that money when an emergency comes up and you don't have anything in there. And, I like what you said about identifying like your top goals to put in there. Cause I think sometimes when people start this goal setting, they get really granular and they're like, I want this, and this, but it's like, how about focus on like your top 3 and then go from there, start saving into those buckets. Now I know there's a high yield savings account out there that has this feature, which is incredible. I think it's Ally Bank. And people love that because you can actually put it right into your high yield savings account and it keeps track of your buckets for you, which is really cool. So I think that could be an option for them as well.
Yeah, that's one of my big gripes about Vanguard is inside of their high yield savings account. Like I love the account, I love the interface and everything, but you only have one big bucket. And so like you said, like I keep a spreadsheet or like a note on my phone, and I know that like here's the breakdown of all of my money in there. And so in my mind, there's these buckets. But I think SoFi as well, like they call them either vaults or buckets where you can just kind of say like, cool, here's this one big account, but it's broken up into these smaller buckets, which such a good feature, especially like if you want to save towards multiple goals. But like my rule of thumb is always, what are my, like you said, top 3, maybe even top 4 savings goals? And then out of those, what's like the most important, or maybe the top 2 most important things? And so like this person listed these 4 goals that they have. And looking from the outside, I'd probably imagine that buying a home, starting a family, like those are probably the 2 more important goals. Yeah. And I think that should be reflected in the percentages that you allocate towards these savings, right? And so if your savings rate, right, you have a percentage of your income that you're able to save, out of that, can we break that up into different percentages for each of these goals? And so I think between your top like 1 or 2 most important savings goals, something like 60 or even 80% of your savings should probably be going towards that goal. And then maybe the other like 40 to 20% that can go towards these other goals of like buying a car down the road or vacations. But I think another thing to consider too is like your timeline with these things, right? If you have a long time horizon to save, right? Like if your car, like it's a champion, right? It's going strong and you got like 5 more years on this thing, you think, then I would say, cool, I can probably take it a little bit slower, put that kind of on the back burner. Maybe I'm saving like 10% of my total savings is going towards this car because I have so much time to build up that savings, as opposed to if I need to pay for something big in a year, most of my savings should probably be going to that. So I think you kind of got to weigh what are the things that are most important to me, and then how much time do I have before I need to start accessing this money?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. So my current situation, in our travel fund, we've really stopped like contributing to it for the time being, just because we have no trips planned. We don't really even know what the future looks like for that. We just moved and stuff, so we're not really in a big hurry to go travel anywhere. And so that is something that we've shifted, like the goals there. Now, if we had a trip, like maybe to like Europe or something in the summer, we would be actively putting a large portion of our savings in there because we know that trip is coming up. So yeah, I agree with you. You're going to focus on those ones that are most important, and the other ones maybe on the side, maybe put a little bit in. But, if those other things are in the near future, then I would focus on those.
That's a really good point, because my wife and I, we were saving to buy a home. And so like that was like our primary focus. And so most of our savings was going as cash into a high yield savings account. And now that we've kind of hit that savings goal that we wanted to the amount that we wanted to save, now it's like, cool, we're not really saving for the house anymore. And so instead of saving cash, we're putting most of our stuff into investments, but kind of just pivoting as you hit different goals, and then pivoting between different accounts depending on your time horizon.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So why don't we move into the next question? So this person wrote, how big is your emergency fund? I'm trying to find the right balance between maintaining a financial safety net and investing in the future. Before having kids and owning a home, I kept a 3-month emergency fund, invested a few $100s per month, and put 10 to 20% of my income in my 401k. Now expenses are way up. The mortgage plus daycare are $4,000 per month alone. Then there's food, car loans, and so much more. While my wife's job is recession proof since there's literally never been layoffs in their 50-year history, I work in tech at a startup and supply half the family's income. We stock our 401ks and 529s, but we're going to need to renovate or upgrade our home in the next 2 to 5 years. Am I crazy for thinking that we should have a year's worth of cash in a high yield savings? I kind of hate the idea of that money not being invested and growing, but I also realize that if I get cut, it could take 8 months for me to find a new job.
Yeah. And I think, whenever we talk about high yield savings accounts and putting your emergency fund in there, we're really talking about, a 3 to 6 month of expenses. But in certain situations like this one, it's going to depend on your circumstances. So I totally understand this world of being in tech and being able to take a little bit of time to find a job. I'm currently saving up for an increased emergency fund because, I'm on a contract right now. I don't know what that looks like for me at the end of it. So totally understand his perspective here. He's definitely not crazy. He's just being, conservatively prepared, I would say. Now, in this situation, like I probably would keep 8 to 12 months just because, if he doesn't find a job and he's half of that income and that daycare and home and stuff are, running 4,000 plus a month, that can be a big hit to, their financial situation. So for me, I know, it's not, you're not going to be gaining anything in the stock market, but like your financial security is more important than like any gain you're going to make there. Right. So I'm probably just going to continue to do what you're doing and keep that money in the high yield savings account. Now, let's say you do transition to another job and it's more secure. It's not a startup, you know, things like that. Then maybe you consider taking some of that money and then investing it in the market, because then you can, you know, reduce your emergency fund there a little bit. But what do you think, Nick?
Yeah, you know, this person said that his wife's job is like recession proof. And I think now more than ever, like over the last few years, I think we've started to see that jobs that were considered recession proof in the past, like it's just not a reality anymore. And so, you know, that's kind of one thing I would push back, and that would probably, you know, cause this person to want to save up even more money. But like, I would say no job is recession proof, right? Like no matter what industry you work in, right? Like I always say, like you're one bad day or one like argument with your boss away from losing out on half the household's income. But, you know, it's understandable, right? If you have kids and your expenses are really high, like you're probably going to want to lean towards a heavier emergency fund. And then if you didn't have as many responsibilities or financial obligations, it'd probably be okay to lean maybe towards like a lighter emergency fund, maybe on that three months end of the spectrum. But, you know, I think this person also just has to recognize like the stage of the life that they're in. Like when you're younger, you don't have those responsibilities. Like you're probably like flush with cash. You can afford to put most of it into investments because you might not need to access that cash immediately. But like this person sounds like they're probably in their 30s, maybe even 40s. Like life is really running its course, right? Like they have all these expenses. And so having that cash on hand, I think is going to be really helpful. But, you know, I think for me personally, and this might change, right? Like I don't have kids, my wife and I, we don't own a home yet. And so this answer might change down the road. I think where I'm at today though, is I would probably max out like the cash that I have on hand to like a 6-month emergency fund. And even if you want to say like, oh, that's like a beefier 6 months, right? Like it could afford us still going out or still putting money into savings from those monthly expenses. And then beyond that 6 months, I would just be investing that money. And I think for me personally, like I would probably be investing it in just like a taxable brokerage account, something that I still could access those funds in the short term if I needed to, even though that wouldn't be ideal. But I don't know, for me, like having saved up so much money to buy a home, like it's really started to kind of change my perspective of the drawbacks of being heavy in cash, right? Because you're kind of just sitting on that. And when you see the market have these crazy high ups, you're like, man, that could have really grown if I had invested it. But, you know, you also have to toe the line between your time horizon and the possibility of the market going down. Like you never really know what's going to happen. Yeah.
And I'm also wondering in this person's situation that he doesn't give like specific numbers, but like, you know, are you trying to save up exactly how your lifestyle is now so that during those, you know, he said 8 months. So I'm just going to give it out there. Like if he's off work for 8 months, are you continuing to have the same exact lifestyle? And that's fine if you want to do that. But also you could just, you know, if you're off work for those 8 months, like scale back on some of those like discretionary expenses that you wouldn't really need to be spending during that time. So that's a way you could kind of free up some money as well. I don't know. That was just a thought, but yeah, it seems like he has probably a large stack of cash just sort of sitting on the side there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, right? Like if you lose if you know, the husband were to lose his job, right? And he said they would lose half the family's income. Like we're probably not going out to eat. Like we're probably not saving as much money as we were. Like all the discretionary spending, like that's definitely, in my mind, that's getting rolled back. Like I don't think an emergency fund needs to fund your exact lifestyle. Like it just needs to get the bills paid in a worst case situation where someone gets hurt and they can't work or they lose their job. Like the bills have to be paid, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to maintain the same level of lifestyle. Now, and that's also up for each individual person to decide too, right? Like I've seen people who want to save emergency funds that are like, in my mind, would probably cover almost double what they would need on a monthly basis if they were to cut back to bare bones. But I mean, if this person's spending $4,000 on daycare and a mortgage alone, like their monthly budget is probably like at a minimum, like $6,000 to $8,000, right?
Yeah.
You multiply that times 6, right? Like you're looking at a huge chunk of cash to sit in there. So I don't know. It's a tough call because even if you want to hold six months or even 8 months or 12 months, like you got to look at how much cash are you holding and what's the opportunity cost of not investing that money too. So you kind of got to weigh both sides of it.
And I just thought of if he's off work for 8 months, daycare's out of the picture, right? Like you can
That's a good point.
watch the kids and there's that big expense out there. So
it's like $2,000 back in your pocket.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Should we jump into the next question here?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So this one says, how much should I be putting away for retirement each month? I'm 28 years old and will finally be debt free next month. I've spent the last few years paying off various credit cards and will be making my last car payment soon. I have a few months worth of expenses set aside, but no real retirement yet. I'm just so lost when it comes to saving for retirement. Should I be putting away a flat percentage from each paycheck or something more specific? And how do I even know how much I'll need for retirement?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. And I feel like people, once they start to get more aware of their finances, they also start to become more aware of what they don't know, right? And that question of how much do I actually need for retirement? I think that's a big one that people start to have, especially like as they get more into adulthood and they start investing for retirement, whether that's, you know, through an IRA or through work, like that question comes up and it can be a hard question to answer, especially if you've got like 30 plus years until you hit retirement age, right? Like what are expenses going to look like, right? Because that's kind of one of the biggest factors is how much of my income do I need to replace in retirement? But I think most people would say that they've heard the general rule of thumb of like saving 15% of your gross income for retirement. And, you know, at least the way that Lauren and I look at it, it's like 15% is a really solid baseline. Like, can you get to 15% and can you hit that comfortably month after month? And once you're at that standard, then we can start to look at some other tools to kind of optimize for what's the exact amount that I should be saving, or at least a closer or more specific amount that I should be aiming for. And then how can I tweak the numbers to make sure, am I, you know, over investing? I could be investing in things in the short term, or am I under investing and need to do something to make up that gap? But really in particular, there's two rules that I like to use to figure out what someone needs to be saving. And you know, one thing I want to say, like, this isn't perfect math, right? This is, a lot of people like to call it like back of the napkin math. Like it's going to give you a really good estimate. And it's going to be a lot closer to an exact number than if you were to just say save 15%. But the first one is the rule of 25 and the 4% rule. And so basically the rule of 25 says that you're going to need 25 times your annual future expenses. So those expenses in retirement, you're going to need 25 times that amount to retire comfortably for 30 years. And then the 4% rule says off that amount. So let's say it was $1 million. You're going to be able to pull 4% of that per year, adjusted for inflation, and that money should last you for the next 30 years. And so you can kind of use those two rules to work backwards to figure out what you're going to need to save. And, you know, just as like a quick breakdown, right? Like let's say that you would need $60,000 per year in retirement to live comfortably, make sure your bills are paid, like you can run your budget smoothly. Then the rule of 25 would say that you would need 25 times that amount, or $1.5 million saved up to comfortably retire. And using the 4% rule, you'd be able to pull 4% off, or that same 60 grand every single year. And again, that's adjusted for inflation. So year one, you're taking that 60 grand. Year two, you're going to take 4% plus the rate of inflation for that year. And that should last you for 30 years without touching the principal, or at least without running out of money. Now, the really cool part about using those two rules is we can kind of work backwards using things like a compound interest calculator to figure out, all right, if I need $1.5 million saved up by the time, by retirement age, here's how many years I have left. Then I can look at, what do I need to start investing on a monthly basis? So, you know, this person said they're 28 years old. They have 37 years before they hit that 65, right? That's kind of like the general retirement age. This person would need to invest $600 per month at an average 8% return to be able to hit that 1.5. So you can kind of work backwards using these other tools, these other rules to figure out what you should be saving now to hit the goal that you want in retirement.
Yeah. And, you know, this person said that they're debt free next month. They paid off their credit cards. They paid off their car. They probably have $600 free right there. Yeah. You know what I mean? So I don't know their goals or what their income is and stuff, but, you know, that should be encouraging. Like you're 28, you have your financial self under control, and you have a really nice potential to have a really good retirement. You know, some people at 28 are like, this is really late, but it's not, you know, like you have so much time left, you know, remaining. Now, as far as the rule of 25, I think I do this calculation way more often than I should. And in particular, like how fast I can get there. So I've always said like, you know, quick math, but like, I want to have 100,000. So I would need to save 2.5 million. And I run that investment calculator all the time. Like, how fast can I pay this off? Or how fast can I get there? You know, can I save this up in 5 years? Like, no, probably not. But I think if I'm aggressive enough, I think I can do it in like at least 15 or something. So, nice. 15, 20, I don't know. But yeah, I think that, you know, this person's on the right track here. They got debt free because of course we would not want them to start chucking a ton of money into retirement when they're still paying off credit cards.
Yeah.
But also I think it's a good thing for this person to make sure that they have their budget under control too, because why are you paying off credit cards? You know, was there some spending that was out of control there or whatever? So having a clear budget and then having a clear, chunk of that set aside for retirement as well. So they're definitely on the right track here.
Yeah, no, it's funny that you say that because I was, plugging some numbers into calculators just to kind of pull some references for this question. And like I started plugging in my own numbers and I was like, man, like you can really go down the rabbit hole with this. And, I think one thing that doesn't get considered enough is 60 grand might be enough to cover your expenses to date, right? Like maybe you've determined that's what I need for a full year and then I can use the rule of 25. But 60 grand today is not going to be worth the same amount as 60 grand in 37 years, right? When this person is 65. And so you can use other tools like an inflation calculator to kind of get close. But I think that's one thing you really got to consider, right? Like 60 grand today. And I ran the math on this. You're going to need like 3 times that amount in 37 years to have the equivalent. So that 180K in 37 years should be roughly equivalent to 60K today. And so you almost kind of have to run this calculation every few years to see how are expenses looking today and am I on track, right? Because as your expenses go up, as inflation goes up, the cost of goods goes up, this number is going to change, right? It's almost always like it's a moving target. And that can be a little discouraging to some, but I think all that is to say is like you shouldn't just kind of set these numbers and forget it and say, cool, I'm done. I can just save this amount and I'll be fine in 30 years, right? Because you might wake up and realize you didn't save enough. And so running these numbers, like Lauren, like you said, like running these numbers like even too often probably isn't the worst idea. And just reassessing where am I at today? Am I still going to be on track with the way expenses have gone up or how my responsibilities have kind of evolved? I think you got to continue running these numbers to make sure you're staying on track.
Yeah, maybe I need to adjust my numbers. I was just assuming like I don't have a house payment or anything and
Nice,
100K would be great, but it seems like 100K is going to be like 50 grand a year then. So maybe I need to adjust there.
Yeah, I mean, that's when it kind of starts to get scary too, because you're like, oh man, I really got to save then. But that's a good point that you just brought up about not having a house, not having to pay for housing, right? Like, I think if you kind of look at some of these numbers and you're like, there's no way I can put away, $2,500 a month to hit the amount that I need to hit. I think you can kind of start to look at be a little more realistic with the numbers. If you're spending like 30% of your income on housing and the goal is to eventually purchase a home and then pay that off over the course of the next 35 years, then you don't need to make up that same 30% in your future expenses because that expense is already going to be paid for. And so you can kind of tweak the numbers a little bit based on what you expect your situation to be. So I think that's one thing to definitely keep in mind is like, you're not going to have all the same expenses as you have today, but there might also be additional ones like added medical expenses, things like that,
Yeah, definitely.
All right, taking a quick break from today's episode, Lauren and I have some exciting news we'd like to share with you. If you're feeling stuck with your finances and don't know where to start, we have you covered with our one-on-one financial coaching.
These are no strings attached coaching sessions that you can sign up for today. No ongoing commitment. You simply book a session whenever you need one.
Each call is 90 minutes, and by the end of it, you'll have a clear budget to work with and a solid plan to start paying off your debt. Plus, we'll make sure you walk away with some awesome tools to keep you on track, including our budget dashboard and expense tracker, as well as our debt payoff optimizer.
And the best part, you'll get to work with both of us on the call. Together, we'll help you develop the best possible strategy forward, answer your questions, and make sure you feel confident about managing your money.
So if you're ready to get a handle on your budget and kickstart your financial journey forward, check out the link in the show notes to book your first session.
We can't wait to get started with you. Now, back to the episode.
Cool. So why don't we move on to the next one then? So this person wrote, what do you do with your money after all your savings goals are met? At this point, I have a solid emergency fund, some additional cash set aside for vehicle maintenance, medical bills, or pet bills if needed, and cash in a high yield savings account for other long-term savings goals. What's next? I always hear about making your money work for you. Am I making a mistake holding on to so much cash? Should I be investing that money instead, or just start investing my income moving forward since my savings goals are met?
Yeah. And I love this, like, good work on saving up all of your savings goals. That's huge, but making that money work for you, like, it is working for you. It's in your high yield savings account. It's going to protect you if a rainy day occurs and it will, right? I personally am not going to invest anything like my sinking funds or my emergency fund because there's more risk involved. Like, unless you're putting something in the market for 5-10 years, you could potentially lose money there. Right. So I'm going to keep it in my high yield savings account because those are things that could happen tomorrow. Right. And we don't want to put that money in there that we need in the near future. So I always say, like, any sinking funds, emergency funds, keep that available to you. And the high yield savings account's the perfect place for that because you're getting a little bit of interest, but it's doing its job. Now, as far as, what's next? So this person says they're done with everything, I personally might buff up that 3-month emergency fund up a little bit. Maybe get to 6. So you're feeling really good about it, but you can start a new category for yourself in your budget, which would be your investments, and I would probably take, that little bit of money and start building up your emergency fund a little bit more. And then starting to take that extra money that you had from all your other sinking funds that you've already saved up for and go ahead and start putting that into a low cost index fund or, whatever you want to do with it. But start there. Don't worry about the money you have now. That is perfectly fine where it's sitting. Let's not think about emergency funds as something that's like, I'm missing money from the market because you have that money. Money is your security. So think of it more of that way. But that's my initial take on this.
Yeah, whenever I'm trying to determine where I should park this money, like in a savings account or investments, like the thing I always look at is what do I want to eventually use this money for, and what is my timeline for using it? I think if you can answer those 2 questions, that's going to help you decide where to park it, whether that's a high yield savings account or in a taxable brokerage account. But my general rule of thumb with the timeline side of things is if I'm going to need the money in the next 3 years, like no question about it, it's going in a high yield savings account. Like the market is too volatile to try to put it in the market for 3 years and hopefully it's going to at least retain its value if it doesn't go down. Right. Yeah. But if I'm going to be saving this money for the next 3 to 5 years, that's when I'm okay with like taking a little bit more risk. I am younger, so for me, risk is something I'm a little bit more okay with. And so maybe I'm going to take a split approach. Maybe like the majority is going to be in cash, and then maybe like 30 or 40% of that savings I'm going to put into just like a low cost ETF, something that I can access easily. But if this is going to be money that I'm going to be saving for 5, 10, 15 years, right? Like if I know like, cool, my car is great today. Maybe I just got a new car, but I want to start saving for the next one. This car should last me 5 to 10 years. Maybe that money, if you're going to hold on to it for a long time, that's when I think it's safer to throw that into a low cost index fund, something with a reliable track record, that you can keep invested for a fair amount of time. It's not retirement money, but it's something that's going to be in there for at least 5 years. To me, that's when I know it's worth it. In my mind, with my risk tolerance, to have that money invested rather just sitting in cash, Yeah.
And, this person, I got caught up in this too. So after my debt-free journey, you always feel like there's just like, what's the next goal? What's the next goal? Like for me, it was like, how fast can I pay off this debt? And then it was like, how fast can I save up this emergency fund? And then it was like, how fast, and I'm still kind of doing this, how fast can I build up my retirement accounts? Cause I just feel behind on them a little bit, but it's also important to make sure you're like living a little bit. This person's like really amped on their savings goals. They're ready to invest, but like live your life as well. Make sure I have like a budget line every month where I just have like miscellaneous, and I can just like, if I want to buy something or, go out somewhere, like I have the money to do that. So, but I also like have, strict, pretty much the same every month of what I'm saving in my, Roth IRA as well as my taxable brokerage account. So I think that's also important to note here is like, okay, that's great. You're moving on, but also like, let's just like take a step back and, enjoy some of this money that you have as well.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. I think especially like you hit all your goals, like you shouldn't necessarily be saving money just to save money. Like at the end of the day, it should be to put yourself in a better position to enjoy that money at some point. And I would say if you're, at a place where you feel like all of your most pressing goals, like you've saved enough money for those, like now's the time to enjoy it, right? Like, can I be a little bit more generous? Can I go out and do things that I've been wanting to do? But this person said like all my savings goals are met. Like, is that it? Like there's nothing else. Like you can't dream a little bit bigger and think of anything else that you might want, even if it's like a really far out goal, like 10, 15 years. Like, I don't know. I always find for me, it's helpful to have something that I'm working towards. And then what I found is that makes me makes it easier for me to enjoy the money that's left over. Because I feel like if you're in this weird place where like you don't have a savings goal, you can either be over saving and not enjoying your money enough, right? Not enjoying life, or under saving because you're not really aiming at anything. And I think if you can set a realistic goal, you can work that into the budget and just treat it like it's another bill. Like, cool, I have to save $500 a month for X goal. Then you don't have to feel guilty about spending what's left over. And you can know like, cool, I'm staying on track, and everything that's left, like I can just spend guilt-free on things that I want to do. So I don't know. I'm kind of like, I need a goal to be working towards in order to feel like okay with spending everything that's left. Cause I know I'm on track and I'm making the right kind of progress.
Yeah, I agree with that because like I said, I'm sort of, I've gotten better with it, but like, you know, you can have all these goals to like, I want to save $1 million, but then like when you get there, you're not even gonna know how to spend it anyway. So I think it's really good. I've heard so many people on podcasts with like multi-million-dollar net worths, and they're like, you know, focusing on the smallest expense. And you're like, what are you doing? But like, they've been in that mindset for so long that you don't just like suddenly, as soon as you get $1 million, like, you know what I mean? Go off on a different way of living. Like this just doesn't happen. So it's really good to implement that now. So I love that you brought that up.
Yeah.
All right. Should we jump into the next one here?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so this one says, how do you balance saving for the future with enjoying life today? Like traveling and doing fun things. Okay, so I just turned 30 and I'm realizing I didn't have many memorable experiences in my 20s. I spent a lot of my younger years really focusing on getting my finances in order. I have a good job. I feel like I'm on track with retirement, and I have money set aside for emergencies. While I don't have any regrets with how I spent my 20s, I really want to prioritize enjoying life in my 30s. I love the idea of traveling and finding opportunities to enjoy the money I worked hard for. At the same time, I don't want to completely ignore my finances. How do I make sure I'm still staying on track with my finances while also enjoying life today? Great relevant question.
Yeah, right. Just leads right into it. No, I really like that this person said that they don't regret how they spent their 20s and now they're just looking ahead, right? Like they put in the hard work to put themselves in a really good financial position, and they recognize like, yeah, I didn't get to do a whole lot in my 20s, but instead of like looking back and thinking like, oh, I really messed up, like I wasted my time, they're like, cool, how can I now use this great position that I've worked so hard to get into to really look forward and start to live life, like create these memories and have these experiences that you really want to go after into your 30s. But yeah, I think this person's done a really great job with their finances. And you know, like I said in the last question, like you don't work so hard at your money just for the sake of working hard at your money. Like there's always got to be a purpose behind it. And I think at the core of that at the end of the day, it should be to enjoy your money, right? Like, yes, you want to make sure you're paying off your debt and building up your emergency fund and investing for retirement, right? Like all of these things have to get in order. But the point of that is so you can get to a position where you can actually start to enjoy your money, right? Like you've taken care of the things that need to get done. And now you can enjoy that money without the guilt or shame or whatever other emotions that might have been attached to having debt or not having money saved up. Like that's the point of why you work so hard with your finances.
Yeah. And I feel like this is a similar situation to me. Like I spent my late 20s, like getting out of debt and like, you know, really not doing much other than paying off debt. So now it's like, okay, how can I, you know, use this money I have now to enjoy my life? This person, you know, they've done a good job. They're on track for retirement and they're set aside for emergencies. So it's like, if they value traveling, then that's what they need to be putting their money towards. So I read this book. I don't know if you've read this book. I don't know if we've talked about this, but it's called Die with Zero, I think.
Oh, I think you mentioned that before.
Yes. And it really changed my mind on some of these things because, you know, we can work so hard to save for retirement, but say you retire at 60, you know, 70, whatever, then it's like, okay, but can you do these experiences in that older age, or should you have been, you know, focusing some more of your money to do those experiences while you're younger? So I think this person's a really good example of that, to take advantage of the life they have right now. They're in their 30s. Seems like that's what they value. So go out and do that. And, you know, put aside, you know, have a sinking fund for travel. If that's your number one priority, then like we talked about in this episode previously, like, you know, take a majority of that extra money and throw it toward that and do what you want to do, especially because you've really have sounds like the financial foundation to do it.
Yeah, I think I think this person is definitely in a position where they can start to work into the budget, like intentional amounts of money that they need to spend, right?
Yep.
Like, I think if you worked really hard, gotten yourself in a really good position, like some people can be stuck in this place where like they're almost afraid to spend the money because they might have been having to work through like the scarcity mindset, like, oh, I have this money now, I might not always have it. And so they just want to save all of it. And I think if you've gotten to a good spot, you got to work in intentional ways to go spend it. And so, like you said, that could be a travel fund. That could just be like, hey, there's like $300 in the budget every single month that I have to spend, and I can spend it on whatever I want, from going out to buying clothes or whatever it is, right? Like but I think, once you get past this point of building up your foundation and now, you're focused on the growth and that stuff's going to kind of run its course, then I think you got to create opportunities where you have to like enjoy your money and spend your money. And I think if you can set some clear financial goals and you can kind of work the math and see, cool, what do I need to save to stay on track with those? That's when you can kind of free yourself up mentally to say, cool, I'm saving the amount of money that I need to hit the goals that I want. Now I can focus on just spending everything that's left. And that's not to say you have to waste it, right? But I think if you're spending it on creating really memorable experiences or, helping out some family members or some friends or just doing things that you've really wanted to do, like, I don't think you're going to look back in 30 years and think, oh man, I wasted that money, right? Like, I think once you've built that foundation, then it's okay to spend money on things that maybe aren't you're not optimizing every single dollar at that point. And I think that's okay. Like that's the point of getting to this position in your finances.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I'm in this exact spot right now, like kind of what you just mentioned. Like, I have my budget set up. I put, not as much as I can, but like I have good numbers going into my investments that are going to get me to where I want to be. And sometimes it's hard because I'm like, I have a lot of money left over at the end of the month and I'm like, oh, I should just put that all in investments. And I'm like, no, like, what's the point of life? Like, I want to, live. So I actually had a new goal for 2025. Like, I want to go see my friends more often. I want to pay for, my family to be able to come and see me because I don't live in the same state as them anymore. So that's something that I value. And it's like, I just had to like actually, plan it out and then do it. So I actually just paid for my sister to come out here. She'll be here like in a few weeks, which is, that's what I want to spend my money on now. So like you said, you just have to plan it out and figure out what you value.
Yes, it's so funny you mentioned that because last night, like my wife and I were having almost the same conversation, and like, for context, I think I talked about this in a last episode, but like, my wife and I each got a credit card, a Southwest Rapid Rewards credit card. And we were so intentional last year of putting as many expenses as we could so we could qualify for the companion pass, which if you don't know, it's like basically like, if I pay for my flight, my wife can just fly free for me, no matter how expensive the flight is. It's like a $20 charge and that's it. Mm-hmm. And so we were like, cool, we want to travel more this year, and we'd set some money aside for it. And last night we were talking about going to Las Vegas to visit one of our friends. And the first thing that came into my mind is like, okay, how much is this going to cost? I'm like, I need to like kind of get out of that mindset. Cause it's like, we worked hard to get the companion pass. So the flights are going to be cheaper. And then we set aside money, to afford like hotels and other travel expenses. And I'm like, okay, I gotta just be okay with spending the money because maybe we don't qualify for the companion pass next year, right? Like maybe this is the year where I can really take advantage of where we're at and get in as much traveling as I can, or just, create these experiences. And it kind of goes back to that thing. Like you got to kind of give yourself permission to say, I've worked hard and now I can spend the money.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
Cool. Ready to move on to the next one?
Yep.
All right. So this person wrote, am I losing too much money in my sinking funds? I've got a number of sinking funds for things like home repairs, a new car, new computers and phones, and car maintenance, to name a few. I've also got some vacation money we'll be spending in the next 3 to 5 years, and wedding funds for my kids we're expecting to spend in the next 1 to 5 years. We pay cash for everything and don't do debt. Most of these are fully funded, and it's getting to be quite a bit of money, around $100K for the general stuff and $75K for the wedding savings and close to $80K for a new car. All of this money is sitting in a high yield savings account. Over the last 2 to 3 years, as the balance on these accounts have grown, it's gotten more painful to not be investing it. Does anyone else with a large sinking fund have any advice? I'd like to just chunk all this money into an index fund and let it earn.
$250,000 just sitting in your high yield savings account.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah. I'm going to make the assumption that this person has a high income and a high net worth, especially if they're saving $80,000 for a new car. Like I'm just going to guess they have a high income based on that. I could be wrong. They maybe have been saving this for 25 years. I don't know. And like, yeah, could you be making more money on that? Sure. But I feel like this person really likes their funds that they have like ready to go if they need it. And it seems like they do kind of need some of this stuff. They don't say like when they need a new car, but like the weddings are coming up within the next 1 to 5 years, and the vacations 3 to 5. So it's like, you probably shouldn't put that into the market if you need those things, you know, sooner. Like we talked about earlier in this episode, like there's timelines to do that, but probably in this situation, not. Now, $100K for all of all of the phones, the computers, and all of that stuff, like that's quite intense. But I don't know if this is like a small portion of like their net worth. Like I don't have a problem with this sitting there. But like I think you need to stop with your sinking funds. Just like I think you're good. And then maybe just take like the money that you were putting into these accounts and then just invest that so you can feel better about it. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not putting this money in the market, I don't think. Just because I'm assuming that this person has a pretty high income at this point. But what do you think about this?
I don't know. I question, is any of this person's kids, like, are they actually engaged?
Right.
Because they wrote, we're expecting to spend this money on their weddings in the next 1 to 5 years. Like 1 to 5 years is a huge window for like, oh yeah, like if they're engaged, like, okay, I can kind of see it because that's probably like a year or two out. But if you're saying 5 years, you're like, I'm almost betting that like none of this person's kids are engaged yet. And they're kind of just planning for when it hopefully will happen. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, no, you said it. It's all relative. Like $250K in cash is a lot of money in cash, but it depends on what percentage of your net worth that is, right? Like if this is 50% of your net worth and it's just sitting in cash, like, yeah, you're not making the right decision there. Like I think more of that should be invested, growing and, you know, helping you increase your net worth. But if this person has like over, you know, is a multimillionaire, right? Like has a huge net worth, has all their retirement accounts set up, has other taxable brokerage accounts set up, then having this money in cash, like it's not a big deal. And it's okay that they're not making money off of this money. Right. But again, you're right. I said it before. And like, I think you kind of got to have this rule of thumb and then just stick to it for where to park your money. And so if you need it in the next 3 years, keep it as cash and a high yield savings. If it's like a 3 to 5 year window, like maybe take a little bit of risk and do a split. Like it could be like a 60-40 split between cash and investments. And then if you need that money in 5 years or more, like in my mind, it just makes sense to invest that money. Like you're almost missing out on an opportunity not having that money invested, right? Like I think this person's kind of at that point where hindsight's 2020, right? Like they're at a point now where they've been hoarding this cash for so long that they're like, man, if I had just invested this money, I could have been sitting on double the amount. And I think that's starting to kind of weigh into this. And so I wouldn't get ahead of yourselves, right? Like for the money that you need in the next few years, like you already made the decision, right? You already went down this road. Like you kind of got to just see it out, keep it as cash. But yeah, like you said, moving forward from here, like you probably have more than enough cash. Everything that was going in there, like you can probably afford to put all of that purely into investments, like a taxable brokerage, something you can still access if you need to, but with the intention of just letting it grow. Yeah.
And if this person had said, hey, I have like daughters who are like 2 and 4, I would say, okay, move that money into the market, you know, because you have plenty of time. You have at least 20 years for that, you know, and same thing with the car. If they would have said like, you know, we just bought a car, you know, 2 years ago, we're planning on keeping it for 10 years. But this 80K is going to be for a new car in the future. Maybe move that over too, because you're not going to need that for a while, but we don't know all the details here. But yeah, I think this person has plenty, and it sounds like they're just a saver. But yeah, they need to stop probably saving now because they're realizing that they are kind of missing out. So take that rest and just put it into the market from there.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think you got to look at what the expense is, right? Like if this money's being saved for like a future cost, like a very specific cost, right? It's for home maintenance or car repairs or things like that. Like those are unexpected. Cool. Let me keep that money in cash. But like wedding savings, which could take a few years, right? Like some people plan their weddings over the course of like 2 or 3 years or getting a new car. Like those things tend to have longer time horizons. In my mind, like from the start, I would almost say like those are safer to at least put a portion of that savings into the market so you can really get some exposure and hopefully like what you end up with is not just what you save, but it's also grown to 10 or 20% more than that, you know, based on whatever your time horizon is. But yeah, things like emergency funds, cash reserves for maintenance and things like that around the home, that I think because it's so unexpected, like that's where I would keep cash for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So that wraps up all the scenarios that we have. But just before we close out this episode, we kind of wanted to talk about what are some savings goals that we have. I think we talked about this in some earlier episodes, but it's been a few months, right? Like maybe our goals have changed. So Lauren, where are you and your husband at with like savings goals and progress that you're making towards those?
Yeah, so ours have changed a little bit over the past few months. So I think I've mentioned before that we sold our house this past summer in Pittsburgh and we are now living in Chicago. We're renting. So we put our equity in our high yield savings account. We've been adding to that because we do plan to probably purchase something this spring as far as housing goes. And then I bought a new car this fall. So that's no longer a sinking fund that I'm putting into. And then also I changed jobs this month and I'm going to start buffing up the emergency fund. I think I'm going to save like close to like 10,000 just in case nice. After my contract ends, like if I don't have anything else lined up, like I'm not super stressed as far as money goes. Just to, like the industry I'm in, like sometimes it can be a little bit hairy to like move on to another position. So I just knew that like when I accepted the contract, like that was going to be like what I saved for. So yeah. What about you, Nick?
Yeah. I mean, I've talked about it plenty of times, but saving for a home, right? Like my wife and I, we finally, like as of the beginning of the new year, 2025, we hit our savings goal. And so we were super stoked about that. We actually spent some of that money moving out to Texas from California. That was part of the savings goal, was having moving funds. But yeah, so we've hit that goal. And so I'd say now what's next for us is like, and almost looking back on it, like I almost kind of wish, because we started saving for a home probably like 4+ years ago, right? Like it's been a long journey to save up this cash. Yeah. And like, I think looking back on it, I'm like, cool. I kind of wish that like that first year or two, cause we're still not exactly sure on what our timeline is for purchasing a home. Now we're ready and we're starting to look at places, but that timeline could go, 6+ months out, right? I almost wish that some of that money was in investments, right? And like I said, like hindsight's 2020. Yeah. The market's done great in the last 4 years, but also could have not done great. Yeah. So you kind of live and learn, but I think what's next for us is we're really looking at our cars, because my car is like 8 years old now. In July it'll turn 8, and then my wife's car is almost 13 years old. Okay. And so they're kind of getting up there, and I will say, to be fair, both of them have like relatively low mileage considering how old they are, and but I think it's time that we start saving for at least one new vehicle. Cause I'm just like dreading the day where like my wife's car doesn't start. Cause there's been a few days where I'm like, I don't know. But it still has under 100,000 miles. So I don't know. But yeah, we're starting to save some cash for that. Again, we don't know the timeline from it. We do have some cash reserves. So we're like, cool, let's just chuck this money into like a taxable brokerage, into an ETF. And worst case, if we needed to, we can kind of pull from some of our cash savings, and then kind of just to bridge the gap, right? If our investments are low at that period, pull from our cash, and then we can kind of take those investments out in the future to replenish our cash. I think all that's to say is like, if you have different buckets, you have a lot of options for how you can kind of deploy that money. But yeah, that's kind of it for our savings goals. And yeah, I think that wraps up the rest of this episode. So, if you found a lot of value from today's episode, you got a good laugh in, one thing that we would really appreciate is to subscribe to the channel, and then maybe consider sharing this with a friend. That's really going to be the best way that you can help us grow.
Yeah, and if you want to have your money question answered on the show, you can visit our website, justanothermoneypodcast.com, and click the submit a question button. And don't forget to join us for another episode of Just Another Money Podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations provided on this podcast are for entertainment purposes only and do not constitute professional financial advice. Any financial decisions you make based on the content of this podcast are your responsibility. We strongly recommend consulting with a licensed financial advisor or other qualified professional before making any significant financial decisions. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that we are not liable for any financial outcomes.